Thank you, Robert. And thank you, everybody, for coming. And this is my first time talking about this stuff. Do I have the next slide? Sure. Okay, so I have a little more than 10 minutes, right? I have only one slide, so um, I can go into as much detail as the audience is willing to take from me about this. And so then maybe I'll give a little bit of history of what got me here. I grew up in Santa Cruz and was super stoked the day I got my acceptance to UC Berkeley and decided I was going to take my time at undergrad and take all the cool classes at Berkeley, even though I was a science major, take like intro to astronomy with a great professor who would foam at the mouth and get so excited teaching us about the universe. And that was exactly what I wanted in life, is to understand nature and to understand all the details, but the big picture as well. But not just to understand it, to actually be able to do something with it that would help the world, help the people of the world, help the animals and the plants of the world, and so on. And following along that path, I became the first molecular environmental biology undergrad major. It was a new major created right when I needed a major, so it was kind of meant to be. And I was like, oh man, this is amazing. This world is really creating great opportunities for us to make strides in improving the way things are. And my undergrad research was actually in the geography department, despite that I was in molecular biology. And I got hooked up with a professor who pioneered the field of fourth world geography. And what this was is a type of geography that helps indigenous cultures protect themselves from foreign invasion, such as resource pirating corporations or third world governments or first world governments. Anywhere where there were indigenous people asking for our help, we were willing to take on a project where we would help them learn how to make maps and defend themselves through mapping. And this was became a powerful influence in my life because I got to follow in the footsteps of this project called the Maya Mapping Project, which created the Maya Atlas. And this was a project in Southern Belize that my professor had just completed when I came into his class the first time. And so I was able to learn about it as a finished product and just become awed by what I saw as possible. And I also always was interested in Central America, and so I went down and got to go and check out this place and these people and meet them, and then go to Costa Rica and do a similar project, studying the wildlife distribution and the water quality along the Caribbean in the most remote part, where you're 50 miles from the nearest road. And in doing this type of research, I learned a lot. And the funny thing about it is when you're doing interactions with indigenous cultures in their lands, and you're the scientist with all the powerful tools and machinery and education, it's really easy to think that you're smarter than these people and think that you know more than these people. And that was what I was taught is not the case. And my professor always taught us to respect the locals. And rule number one in this type of work is you never go anywhere you're not invited. And that became a powerful influence on me later, which I will get back to as I talk about this a little bit more. And so anyways, my professor passed away. I was orphaned. The project was never completed, but it was a very developmental stage in my life. And so then I went on, worked in biotech for a few years while I was like, what am I going to do with my life? I'm not here to just be a pawn in a big machine working for some company that's not really making me feel like I'm doing the best I can. And that was when some friends called me up, and they were the seed collectors for the UC Berkeley California native plant section. And they had discovered a bunch of new species of plants on this remote geologic site in Sonoma. And the site became for sale right as I was graduating, and because they couldn't get anybody to buy it, even though it had these rare plants on it, because it wasn't widely known at that point, they ended up spending their life savings to buy it. And then they called up the first scientists that had gone there in the 60s and said, there's all these amazing springs on our land, and this is actually a chunk of the deep earth that's come up along the San Andreas Fault that's reacting with liquid water in a way that is extremely rare in the modern world, but as I learned working with NASA on it later, it's actually what we think the whole surface of the early Earth would have looked like. And the elements that make up this piece of rock are actually 4 elements, or 90% of the Earth's mass. It's iron, magnesium, silicon, and oxygen. And so what I notice is that the way these minerals are reacting with water and altering into new minerals, then they're catalyzing carbon dioxide to form organic molecules in a very intriguing way that NASA is currently touting as the most likely form of energy and environmental setting that's going to be promoting neobiogenesis all throughout the cosmos. And the data from my research site started adding fuel to the fire to that as a plausible way that the universe is patterned, where life would be suddenly very abundant. And so what else have we learned from the breakthroughs in NASA since I started? Well, basically we know that there's planets around almost every star. And so as we've kind of tiptoed through the really painstaking process of doing the hard science, we've learned it almost looks like the universe is designed, I don't want to say intelligently designed, but I'm here so I can. It's almost as if the universe appears intelligently designed from a really scientific perspective to promote life and to promote the origin of life. And of course, I think we're a little bit of proof of that. And so in 2002, I was working my biotech, teaching MCAT courses and praying to God, open a door for me, I want to walk through it. And that was when these botanists called me up and said, NASA wants to study our land, you'd be perfect to work with them. You got to come up this weekend and carry this PBS camera around and make it happen. And that's how I got in there. So it's really who you know so much more often than it probably should be in the world that kind of gives you these opportunities, which is why you should be nice to people and be a kind person, because it will open a lot of doors that otherwise might not be. And when I got that call, I just knew it was exactly what I wanted to do, and I went to work the next month down in Southern California at the University of Southern California, where my boss had just moved from the Jet Propulsion Lab, where he had been the director of the Center for Life Detection, which he was when I met him. And so I was suddenly in with the big leaguers, and my PhD advisor was the $10 billion Mars Sample Return mission leader, or the scientific leader of the mission. And so he had pioneered the planetary protection protocols for the Earth, and was considered the biggest expert in the scientific community on ET biosignature detection. And he had discovered organisms that eat and breathe metals and rocks and very unusual things that have energy that, well, life has evolved to use just about every place you find it, which changed the way we see the possibility of detecting life elsewhere in our solar system, especially. And so therein led to his recruitment by NASA and his Mars Sample Return mission project. And so I joined the lab and worked 80 hours a week for really low pay as a grad student, although my funding was great, so my lifestyle was very exciting. Trying to be the best in the world at detecting aliens. And I had no idea that everyone here wasn't, of unsound mind, no offense. And I was, happy-go-lucky guy doing that for 5 years. And my dad's writing me these letters, caricaturing my work with these microbes and making them look like UFOs, because he had had a sighting. And the little energy fields they emitted, he called black power, because his sighting was from a Rastafarian church in Santa Cruz. And I told him, you have to stop. I will never talk to you again if you don't stop this. I'm so sick of it. I'm the expert. And so you can imagine, I later had quite an epiphany that was humbling. And that happened because my former mother-in-law gave me a book that caused me to go meet a shaman, of all things. And I had a spiritual awakening that was totally profound. That in its own right is interesting, but it's not what I'm here to talk about. But what it did do is it got me to buy all the recommended books on the shaman's website, and one of which was John Mack's book about alien abductions, which provided a scientific story that was grounded in rigorous thinking and academic publications that caught my interest as a biosignature detection professional. And from there, I knew that I had a very, very, very tough job ahead of me. because you sort of intuitively and innately know in the NASA astrobiology program that you don't do that. You don't think UFOs are interesting, and we don't ever talk about it. Somehow we just know that, and I think that's because there's a lot more telepathic ability in us than we've yet acknowledged scientifically, although in other journals, this is certainly the pioneering work that has also been published. And so in my case, I did the best I could to get the best data I could and tiptoe into my professor's office and talk about this stuff, at which point I was told that wasn't an option. And politely tried to do this for a year, knocking gently, and after a year, decided I was going to push the issue and resign in protest because I was holding this huge volume of data that I was convinced way more than satisfied the criteria that we were always using for our protocol for life detection. And I didn't think they'd accept my resignation because my data was so good, and I was so close to these guys, and I thought they were honest. And here I am 8 years later, 8 or 7.5 years later, and they'll give me a letter of rec to any job I apply for, tell me about their families. They would never answer questions about this subject. And that is something that I find bewildering, intriguing, frustrating, and also potentially information for this community to ferment a little bit about. Because I find one of the most empowering things that could happen for all of civilization is for the astrobiologists to wake up to the data that we're not alone, and that they can detect this, and that they would be really wise to do so, because without the mainstream community admiring the brilliance of those guys, which I understand quite well, I find that there's going to be confusion as to what's really happening. And certainly there is confusion right now. They're totally confused. And if you look at the Ask an Astrobiologist website that's linked to my directory listing, it'll say that there is absolutely nothing to what I'm about to tell you, and that it's totally untrue. And that's where I just drew the line, because if we're not willing to question our own assertions, even behind the scenes in private, then I can't take a PhD from my bosses who don't value what I have to say. And so that was where I made a tough decision. And from that tough decision, I went and met some Mayan shaman, searching for the meaning of 2012, said some prayers, and gained some information. And from that information, I didn't believe the information because I wasn't following a path of just, I believe what I have in a sort of a prayer receptive message. But when I ground truthed it, I realized that, okay, the shaman, higher consciousness stuff is real. There's something profound to the idea that we can tap into a higher consciousness source that is, omniscient, omnipotent, you name it. It's on a level that we have really only begun to imagine. And as I started to look into that and discover that and embrace that idea based on the data that I was receiving, I started realizing that there's a lot of evidence from the ancient world and from the ancient sciences that shows that they actually had massive advanced scientific achievement that we haven't yet achieved, and yet they didn't have the tools we have to do it. And so there's a little bit of a mystery as to how it all happened. And so what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what's going on right now in our solar system with respect to the galaxy as I've grown to learn it and to map it. And so what I've done is I've mapped the solstice and equinox positions of the Earth, which you can see designated by the 4 Earths shown here. And the Earths are in the up and bottom position above and below the sun at the equinox. Is there a laser pointer on here? Nice. Okay. And so the Earth, as viewed from above the northern hemisphere, moves around the sun in a counterclockwise direction. And at the equinoxes, it's here on this map, and I'll explain the significance of that in just a second. At the solstices, it's here. This would be the winter solstice, Earth position. This is the summer solstice, Earth position. This is the spring equinox, the fall equinox, Earth position. And this is the spring equinox, Earth position. So the Earth moves around 4 seasons in this direction. And how fast does the Earth move around the sun? Once a year. Yeah, 66,000 miles an hour, or once per year. How many degrees per day does that correspond to roughly? 1 degree per day. And so what's going on right now, represented here, is very interesting because this whole map is coordinated to the galactic center. And what this map is it's 3 different zodiac calendars that include the ancient Vedic Yuga cycle, which describes the coevolution of human collective consciousness with this precession period in a very dynamic form that at first when I read about it, I thought, oh, there's no way they could have known anything like that back then. And I started becoming more open-minded to that as I gained more insight, looking into the evidence. And so I can't present all the evidence in this time, and I certainly didn't bring it with me because I was told I only had 10 minutes. But you can certainly at least get a glimpse of what's captivating to the mind of an astrobiologist who's awoken to the idea that there is a lot more going on in the world than what I previously thought about. And the interesting thing is that these yogis came out in the Himalayas in the 1800s and claimed to have the ancient original knowledge of the zodiac and yoga as taught by Krishna and Christianity as taught by Christ. And what they said is that in the ancient world, it was common knowledge that the precession rate is actually 24,000 years almost exactly. We don't believe that today for some reason. I certainly didn't believe them when I first looked into it. However, I would suggest that we really reconsider the possibility that it is 24,000 and that the ancients were correct, and that the whole zodiac is designed around that to work like a clock that gives us incredibly accurate bearings to make long-term predictions, such as the Mayans made to make the one that I'm showing you now. And so what the Mayans were able to do, which is unbelievable, is predict the exact moment in time when the solstice's positions would be offset from the line that connects the galactic center and the sun by exactly the same degree distance as the offset of the 3 stars of Orion on the other side of the solar galactic line. And so they used those 3 stars to guide their astronomy, but somehow they knew that those 3 stars were almost exactly opposite the sun from the galactic center. And they knew the precession rate to the decimal degree that allowed them to predict thousands of years ahead of time when it would be precisely in mirror symmetry across this line with those stars. And when I was working with the Mayan shaman searching for the meaning of 2012, they were able to tell me very little at the time, but what they told me was exactly what allowed me to figure this out, because they said, has something to do with the galactic center and those 3 stars. And that was basically all I needed, because when I mapped it, the data spoke for themselves, as long as I knew that that's what they thought. And so at first I thought, well, what they must have meant was the exact alignment. And that was what they were trying to predict. And so then I tried to put error bars on this, and I thought, what would the error bar be with a 3.5 degree error over some odd number of thousands of years that they made their prediction? And I was racking my brain and trying to figure it out, and then it dawned on me that it's exactly where it's supposed to be. And that's because they knew the precession rate. And if they knew the precession rate, and the yogis who are swearing that theirs is the final story, and this is basically the guru of Paramahansa Yogananda, who some of you may have heard of, and who I actually got my middle name after, and I didn't realize it until after I came out of the shaman's workshop. My parents finally told me where my middle name came from at 33 years old. And so what we're compelled to see here is that this is a very amazing phenomenon on a lot of levels. And I guarantee it'll be of interest for people over a long period of time, and it'll become of practical consequence as well. And what I'm also not going to say is they actually even have a code associated with it that I'll be publishing soon. And the way that I think this is going to sink in most practically to the audience here, which isn't a hard science audience, is to think about it like this. On the solstices, what happens to the day length experience of the Earth inhabitants? Pardon? Right, so you go from increasing day length to decreasing day length, back to increasing, back to decreasing at the solstices, right? Well, that is what the synchronicity is about, because as the Earth goes around the sun, it's going towards the galactic center as the days are getting longer. And it's going away from the galactic center as the days are getting shorter. Now remember, this is looking at the northern hemisphere. And so the map actually has a bias that, I'm happy I noticed rather than just, forgetting that fact. But then it's interesting to note that the cultures that created these maps are all in the northern hemisphere as well. And in 12,000 years, you'll have the same map in the southern hemisphere. And so it is, a repeating pattern that you'll find through history, that there's this solar galactic cross. And this is a theme that ancient cultures took very seriously. They patterned their lives around these rhythms. Now what the yogis are saying is that this pattern also takes us through the whole Yuga cycle, which has Kali, Dwapara, Treta, and Satya. Now, Kali would be the Iron Age. Dwapara is the Bronze Age. Treta is the Silver Age, and then Satya is the Golden Age. And well, luck be we're the lucky ones because the Golden Age is 4 times longer than Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, and that's a good sign. Even though we're almost at the bottom of the Yuga cycle, we're just out of the Dark Ages, barely into the Bronze Age, just beginning to reawaken to our metaphysical abilities and having some advanced science. Now you can imagine if this is only about, 1,500 years or 1,500 years plus a change from the bottom of the Dark Ages, imagine what it's going to be like in about 10,000 more years when we're at the height of the Golden Age. Okay. If you like this idea, I would say that the archaeological evidence shows that they're probably right about this. There have been higher periods of human consciousness in the past, at least in pockets. As far as a global phenomenon, I think that's going to be an increasing phenomenon that, our consciousness is going to be more unified in the future. I hope it is. Obviously, there's forces that want to divide it. And in any case, at this beginning of Dwapara, this is marked by the sun's position at the autumn equinox. And so the sun would be here when the Earth is right there, which gives us this date, which you can't really see on here, but that's how they told their time. So currently, the year is 317 Dwapara, and it'll be 318 on the autumn equinox. And this pattern that we're seeing, I call it the golden dawn of the Geo-Solar-Galactic synchronicity. Well, I do that because it's just beginning to come into focused alignment, but the next 3.5 degrees of precession movement is going to take about how long? What would you guess? If it goes 24,000 years all the way around, 66 degrees per year, or I'm sorry, 66 years per degree. So you're looking at about 240 years in any case before this line perfectly matches the solar galactic line. But what will be interesting about that? Because this would then be the 21st of December is then. So if you put it right here, then the 3 stars are in perfect mirror symmetry with Christmas, the Earth position around the sun at Christmas Day. So this is a synchronicity that's going to take place in several stages. Right now we have the golden dawn of this synchronicity. In 240 years, we'll have the Christmas galactic synchronicity, and that's going to give you the exact same pattern. And so what's the significance of that? Well, we can hypothesize whatever we want. We all have our own ideas. But what I think it is signifying is that human consciousness throughout history has been able to attain mastery of the cosmic sciences. And it's not been able to do it using advanced tech per se. But it seems like there is a connection to the aliens, so the advanced tech certainly adds a big black box that we need to try to figure out. And I think there's a cosmic struggle. I think there's a cosmic struggle between humans and, you know, some of maybe more self-serving neighbors that are interested in kind of taking credit for a lot of the great things that humanity has actually done, which the code that I'll publish later goes deeper into. But in any case, what I think has happened is that humans have attained amazing cosmic awareness that includes these precise details about the galactic center and their relationship to the precession of our solar system. And I might want to make mention that while we consider precession geocentric, meaning that the Earth's geopole is moving in a circle over a long period of time, these yogis have actually said that it's the result of a binary companion to the sun that causes the whole solar system to turn around once every so often. And so what would you think if I told you that precession was heliocentric? Yeah, and the other sun has not been detected by science, but we think there's a big planet out there somewhere close. My best guess is that maybe it's a dark star, that it's dark energy, and we're going to learn more about this type of energy that doesn't interact with ordinary matter except through gravity in the near future. That's my guess, because if there was a heat source the size of a star that could give rise to the 24,000-year precession rate, our satellites would have detected it. And so we're sure that there's nothing bigger than Neptune well out beyond the 24,000-year orbital distance. And so as a scientist, it's hard to understand the reality. But what makes the most sense, based on the evidence I've seen, which verifies a lot of the stories from these yogis who claim that they've harbored the truth since the Dark Ages high up in the Himalayas, is that we're probably going to detect a nearby companion that may be the dark energy, dark matter that science knows exists but doesn't know its distribution or its relationship to ordinary matter in the near future. And this is what the ancients seem to have known about and understood and written and scripted into their culture and into their philosophies of the universe. And it's pretty profound stuff. And Robert originally thought I was going to come here with the ultimate biosignature. And I wanted to present this because I think this is what is the most interesting in terms of understanding what 2012 is really about and breaking through to the deeper layers, which I don't have time to present tonight. But if you can see how Orion is a constellation that's also important in Egypt, and Sirius or Isis is similarly important, and then see the symbol for the galactic center that is called Ophiuchus. So Ophiuchus is the constellation whose foot is emanating out of the galactic center in the maps, but they won't tell you that that's actually evidence that they knew the position of the galactic center long ago and gave a symbol to this with 2 snakes and with wings emanating up from that point in space. Now, does anyone know what the prophecy of 2012 was for the Maya, the return of who? And who is Quetzalcoatl? The plumed serpent, right? look at that. Returning on 2012 is the plumed serpent from the galactic center position, exactly in decimal accurate symmetry with the ancient guide stars across the solar galactic. As a scientist, that is mind-boggling, beyond comprehension, because how could they have known? And then, of course, I had a spiritual awakening, so it's like, okay, well, there's two ways. They could have either ascended and asked the right questions and had pure enough hearts and minds to be able to receive the data, or ETs told them, because that would have been easy for the aliens. And so you got to take your pick, and we have to kind of tease apart the details to figure this out, but this is the big mystery. And there's no easy answers, but there is an answer, and I think we're approaching it. You know, little by little, we're getting closer and closer to understanding what they knew and what it meant to them. And I think that this is a big part of it. And that this calendar that we've been given by the Vedics is also a relevant guide for seeing how the future is going to be. And so as we're kind of globalizing, struggling with massive deception in the world and trying to figure out what to do about it and kind of feeling like there's too many problems, I can't, you know, how are we going to solve them all? There's always an answer, and there's always a way, and the data shows that we're somehow going to figure it out, you know, because we've come out of the darkest stages already, and we're headed up. And so that's the gist of the basic intro that I have time to give tonight. I hope that I didn't go over too much time, but I was just wondering if there's any questions. I was almost just going to take the time to take questions because, you know, I'm a highly trained NASA astrologist who worked with, you know, some of the best scientists in the world, and maybe that's of interest. Maybe there's questions that could only be answered, or some of you might like to ask. Yes. That's a great question, and I wish I had that slide with me because I've been working on the maps. And there's a Caltech group that just published a paper showing how the skew of the outer moon-like satellites are all on one side, which they then have like a wide swath of an area where they're searching, and I can't tell you exactly. I've forgotten. Because I haven't mapped it on this calendar yet, and so it's one of these things where I can't give a good answer, and I'm not going to try to fool you. But there is a focused area to search, and that's certainly something I'll be happy to share with you if you give me your email, or if you have a contact information, because I can show you my maps, and it is pretty interesting. Yes.
Do you think it's possible that since time isn't linear and that these could be somewhat of a portal to experience the golden age now through these crosses that in time?
Yeah, this is actually a very profound philosophical doctrine on cosmic creation, and it goes really deep into that kind of idea. And what this is not an individual map, it's a collective map. So human consciousness is evolving in like a DNA spiral with the motions of the Earth in relation to the galaxy and the solar system. And that is a profound idea that actually matches the data. And from there you can, you know, listen to the yogis, and what they say is on an individual level, we go through the same 4 cycles. And at the height of it, you know, obviously we're ascended, but we can do that at any moment. Any individual can do that at any time. And certainly all through history, there have been individuals who've done that. And so that's okay. One more question. But yes, the answer is yes. And certainly a lot of people here are not living in the darker ages or the Dwapara, like we've already kind of at least gotten to the Silver Age.
So Ken Carey, Return of the Bird Tribes. Are you familiar with that book? For what occurs and how it occurs will directly affect the DNA templates of generations of galaxies to come. He may have been referring to the portal opening up. If we have the consciousness to take advantage of this time, we can make an exponential leap
Is that a question? Yes. Definitely. And what I want to say about the DNA is there's definitely a struggle with the DNA, and my job was sequencing genomes, searching for biosignatures, and in the DNA I found one, and that was where I think that as it unfolds and as it emerges, you're absolutely right, and we'll learn a whole lot more about the significance of these connections in the next couple years.
Okay, she's got a
It
great
is
question
coming,
here.
and it is the GeminiCode.com. The GeminiCode.com. And it's not up yet, but it's it'll be there shortly. I've got the domain and a couple others. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead and set that down. This wonderful lady over here just paid you an incredible compliment, Orion. She said, "How are you going to follow this guy?" And I thought, that's a hard act to follow. Give another hand for Orion Johnson. Incredible.